I'd now like to introduce today's presenters. Michael Jansen is Chief Research Guru at Everest Group. As co-founder of our research practice, Michael offers profound insights and analysis to enterprises and service providers alike. He is particularly well known for his ability to hypothesize clever and challenging ideas based on his fact-based insights across business and IT processes, sourcing models, and industries. Shirley Hung, Vice President Research at Everest Group, advises senior stakeholders of global services, including enterprises, service providers, and investors, in their strategic mandates and initiatives. Her responsibilities include leading Everest Group's research in the areas of finance and accounting outsourcing, procurement outsourcing, and customer experience management services. Don Tiura, CEO and President at Sourcing Industry Group, also known as SIG, has over 25 years leadership experience, with the past 15 years focused on the sourcing and outsourcing industry. Prior to joining SIG, Don held leadership positions as founder and CEO of Denali Group, and before that as a partner in a CPA firm focused on early Silicon Valley enterprises and high wealth individuals. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Michael. Michael, take it away.
All right, thank you. And so today's session is Elk introduced Don here. We've got Don will be participating in the second half of the webinar, where we get into a question and discussion conversation. We've been working with SIG for almost the past 2 decades, and this is a study that we did with them over the last few quarters here, really digging deep into the topic. And so we find their membership and their group to be really helpful in the conversation. So we really thank Dawn for joining us as well, and her organization's participation. So as we get into the topic here, what we're really trying to do is really drive into a significant level of detail around those capabilities and outcomes associated with procurement in the procurement and outsourcing organizations around innovation. And so for us, it's not just a conversation around being able to understand, hey, what do people want to do? We want to see what they're actually doing. And so as we drive into the details, I'm not going to go through line by line and the methodology, but be assured we do both a quantitative analysis, so we're getting specific answers to specific questions, but then we also do a number of qualitative follow-ups to bring life to the story, and so bring life to that data in how people are actually doing that. So let's get into the study. The study really is focused in on sourcing innovation. We are dedicated to understanding those pinnacle practices, those pinnacle enterprises that are able to achieve above and beyond the rest of their peers in the industry. And we do so based on looking at capabilities and outcomes, a cause and effect impact relationship. And so what we really understand is what you do and what you get for doing that. So as we move into the definition here, innovation, we look at in 3 ways. We look at both on a technology innovation. There's lots of technology, new things that are new and great things that are coming into the procurement organizations, process as well as people. So people, process, and technology. Certainly the technology stuff is pretty exciting right now, and so there's a lot of tendency to look at that, and for good reason. We've got a number of things like RPA and big data. I have to say we didn't see any quantum computing going on in procurement, but there's a lot of other things going on. So think about it as a holistic definition of innovation. As we start to show some of the data slides here, and Shirley and I are going to go back and forth on some of these slides. This is what we call our dot plot slide. And so this represents all of the scores of all the participants in the study. And so each dot is a separate company. We do not name the companies as the results on a specific basis unless we're talking to that specific company. So in this case, XYZ would be one company that would have their specific results. Everything else has been aggregated. What you'll see if you remember back to your college statistics is if you think about a regression line through this dot plot, you would see that it goes from the lower left to the upper right. And that's good when I look at it from an analytical standpoint, and the teams show me the first set of results, I'm always delighted when I see that they got a good sense of what the cause and effect relationship is. And so as you look at the capabilities across the bottom, we measure those in 5 categories, and Shirley will take you through the specifics, basically a page on each one of those blue boxes. And then on the left, we have the outcomes, and so cost impact, operational impact, and business impact. Our goal is to be able to show, again, what people are doing and what they get for that effort. You'll see in the upper right, we have a number of dots up there, a number of companies that have participated that we label as the Pinnacle Enterprises. And so what we're going to do is we go through the rest of the analysis, we're going to show you how those companies did compared to everybody else. One other thing I would indicate when I talk about this specific slide is you do not see any dots in the upper left, you do not see any dots in the bottom right. And that's a good news from an analytical standpoint. What that indicates is we've got a good, solid analytical framework here that allows us to understand and demonstrate that if you don't have capability, you don't get the outcomes, or conversely, if you do have the capability, you do get better outcomes. So I think that's really important to understand that this shows a good representation of those enterprises that are performing above and beyond everybody else. One other quick note here, just because you see cost impact, operational impact, and business impact, all those scores are aggregated. So level 3 does not necessarily indicate business impact or anything like that. It's just an aggregation of those 3 factors along with the 5 capability factors across the bottom. Okay, so with that, Shirley, I'm going to turn we're going to have so we're going to break down into cost impact, operational, business impact. Shirley's going to take us through a slide on each one of those.
All right, well, thanks, Michael. So unsurprisingly, the majority of respondents said that their top priority is to help their organizations reduce costs. Half of the organizations also said that spend consolidation is a top focus area. But despite this alignment of priorities, there is a marked difference in the results that organizations have been able to achieve in the area of cost reduction. Pinnacle Enterprises report an average reduction in spend that is 1.5 times that of other companies. So they're able to achieve nearly an 8% reduction in spend while managing 70% of their organization's total spend. This is in comparison to other organizations where they are managing less spend at around 60%, and only delivering a spend reduction value of just over 5%. From an operational standpoint, Pinnacle Enterprises are also surpassing others across metrics in areas such as improvement in cycle time, process accuracy, compliance, and productivity. However, it's interesting to note that with the exception of cycle time reduction, even Pinnacle Enterprises report only a medium impact to the improvement of operational metrics from innovation. So it appears that this could be an area where further innovation could have even a greater impact. And finally, when we talk about the third category of outcome, that is the business impact. And this is really where the Pinnacle Enterprises pull far ahead of other organizations. Often we hear about how procurement needs to be considered a partner to the business. So we see here that innovation is key to improving procurement's reputation in that regard, with all, that is 100% of Pinnacle Enterprises stating that this is a result of their innovation initiatives. Their innovation initiatives also resulted in increased spend visibility at twice the level of other organizations.
So, I mean, I think, looking ahead, the cost impact and the operational impact are extremely important. This is where I really see the separation. This is where I really think, at a strategic level, the ability to have a 3-to-1 difference in being seen as a key business partner, or a 2-to-1 difference in the visibility, or a 2-to-1 on the collaboration, or a 6-to-1 on the vendor satisfaction. And those kinds of things start to separate things that matter to CPOs and the rest of the business organization. So I look at this as an extremely important kind of not creation of a mindset, but also the outcomes that come with that. Okay, so as we start to think, we just showed you the 3 categories of outcomes. Now we're going to move you into the 5 areas of the capabilities. And so we break it down into the boxes you see there, and Shirley's going to take us through each one of those.
Thanks, Michael. When we looked at the capabilities that really matter, or those that correlate with high outcomes, a few areas of differentiation stand out. Pinnacle Enterprises have a defined innovation strategy. They adopt analytics. They leverage strategic sourcing, have robust risk management processes, focus on talent development, and ensure that they are aligned with corporate objectives. So we'll be talking about all of these areas in a bit more detail in the following slides. To start off in the area of vision and strategy, it's hard to innovate when you don't have the resources to do it. However, I do find it interesting that only half of the Pinnacle Enterprises have dedicated funding for innovation. So we can all understand that having funding will make executing on projects easier. But what this data says to me is that the lack of funding should not be an inhibitor in of itself. Half of the Pinnacle Enterprises are still able to generate the great outcomes that we discussed earlier without explicit funding for innovation. However, what does seem to be a differentiating characteristic is that Pinnacle Enterprises work hard to cross-pollinate ideas across functions, over 5 times as much as other organizations. But even more striking, 1/3 of Pinnacle Enterprises execute a structured innovation process, as opposed to only 2% in other organizations. So what these results say is that having some defined vision and strategy for innovation will lead to improved outcomes for sourcing teams. If you're not talking about innovation or not striving to innovate, then you won't, period. One of the areas of study that we also found surprising was that overall sourcing organizations were not adopting technology and digital at advanced levels. So as Elka mentioned earlier, I work with other functions such as IT, finance and accounting, HR, and sourcing organizations by comparison are behind in terms of how they are leveraging analytics, automation, and other digital solutions. While Pinnacle Enterprises are deriving value from analytics in the areas of spend data management, sourcing strategy development, supplier selection, and performance management, and contract management, many of the other technology and digital levers are only just now being implemented or even evaluated. So there's a lot of room for sourcing organizations to generate value from leveraging, frankly, even basic analytics.
Yeah, so that when I was looking at this slide, Shirley, I was a little bit disappointed. I was expecting to see a little bit more color on here. Even on the Pinnacle Enterprises, we see pretty good coverage or pretty good usage within the basic analytics. But even when you start to move to the advanced analytics or automation or digital solutions, it's still pretty sparse, even within the Pinnacle Enterprises. And when you start to look at the rest of the population, which was a fair number of companies, not so much. And so I think you can look at this as like, hey, why haven't we done that? Or you can look at it as kind of a where's the opportunity here? And I think I would like to look at this thing on there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here as we look forward here. And when we get into the discussion with Dawn, we're going to bring this back up.
So moving on to process management, there are key differences in the capabilities of Pinnacle Enterprises versus other enterprises. Instead of just settling for centralized strategic sourcing, Pinnacle Enterprises pursue a category management approach. So that means looking longer term and planning for their categories longer term. They actively manage tail spend and collaborate with other functions such as HR in the area of contingent workforce. They have a role in managing supplier relationships post-contract, whereas this tends to be done in the businesses in other enterprises. Pinnacle Enterprises also conduct more frequent risk assessments on their supplier base, covering more suppliers than other organizations. This risk assessment also extends to non-strategic as well as strategic suppliers.
So I think this is another area here where, you know, you can look at some opportunities where some of the technology and innovation really could be applied. So when I look at like even things as benign as tailspin, when you see it, you know, one is what the Pinnacle companies are actively managing that, or the risk management, more active management, versus maybe not at all on some of the rest of the enterprises. I think some of the technology solutions out there and the innovation that can be applied in those areas is a big opportunity.
Thanks, Michael. Moving on to the talent side, Pinnacle Enterprises utilize hard rewards such as money and career growth opportunities to attract and retain talent. In addition, a third of the Pinnacle Enterprises also ensure that employees have the time to devote to innovative solutioning, and they are compensated accordingly. So the key capabilities that drive innovation include communication, collaboration, and creative problem solving. And it does help that Pinnacle Enterprises are operating in an environment where innovation is valued and expected. So therefore, governance over innovation initiatives are defined and for the most part managed centrally. This makes sense because innovation needs cross-functional and multidisciplinary involvement, which is usually best enabled through a structured approach.
Yeah, so now if you think about what we've just gone through here, we've shown pretty overwhelming evidence that, you know, the Pinnacle Enterprises are doing some things differently. And I really, when I bring it all back together, I think about it in terms of a kind of a cultural approach to it. So there is funding, there is how we're going to recognize and reward our employees. There's an expectation of the teams that we're going to do it. And so it really, and when we did the interviews and talked to the CPOs on the topic, the sense I got was, you know, there was a certain set of CPOs that were focusing on compliance and really focusing on making sure they were going through the blocking and tackling of procuring and paying for goods, where there's another set that were focusing on serving the business in a much different way. And I think that's really what it comes down here. Is it really comes down to what is the expectations and you know, cultural viewpoint of how procurement can serve the rest of the organization. And if you really take that aggressive approach that says, hey, listen, we're here to make a real impact. We can use innovation, whether it be people, process, or technology, and make the real changes we're looking for. Okay, so in summary here, as we kind of gone through the data from the study in a very summarized way, we talked about the culture, we talked about the vision and the organizational structure, and then using the ecosystem, and then motivating and incentivizing people. And I think those things as a combination. Now, what we wanted to do is kind of move into the discussion here, and we're going to bring in Dawn into the dialogue here. And so Dawn, I wanted to, you there, Dawn?
Yes, I'm here, thank you.
Okay, let me start off with a first question for you on terms of what was your overall impression of the study when you were seeing the results, and you have seen the extended results, I know, but what was your impression?
Well, I was disheartened by the number of companies that made it up to the Pinnacle side of the equation, but I also find that means we have a tremendous amount of opportunity to still keep leading people just to really, you know, get into the innovative mindset. So overall, I was disappointed with the number of companies that were there, but I don't think I was actually very surprised.
And Shirley, what was anything surprising to you?
So I tend to be actually more of a glass half full kind of person. So I look at the data around innovation funding, or the lack thereof, to be particularly motivating, actually. Half of the Pinnacle Enterprises do not have funds allocated to innovation initiatives, yet somehow they find a way to devote time and resources to it. And not just to execute on initiatives, but to derive huge outcomes for their businesses. So this means that sourcing organizations should not let the lack of funding be the defining roadblock for them to pursue what they think can generate real business value. It may require a bit more ingenuity to do so, but it can be done.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be sharing a practitioner's perspective soon on how one such Pinnacle enterprise has driven innovation by focusing on business objectives and speaking their language, collaborating with atypical functions such as marketing to drive a culture change, work to influence policies outside of procurement, which proved to be an inhibitor to achieving business objectives, and partnered with procurement startups as an early adopter. And that was the way he got over that perceived barrier for pursuing innovation.
Yeah, when you and I did that conversation with the CPO, you know, his whole perspective on compliance was, if I'm driving impact, I don't have to worry about compliance because it'll come more naturally. And so I don't have to walk around the organization stalking people saying, hey, you're not doing this, you're not doing that. They're going to come to, if we're a good business partner, they will come and work with us because the benefits are obvious. And so he was using not only the mentality of innovation, but really making it work in the organization. So Dawn, you saw the same slide there where we saw a relatively lack of activity in terms of the analytics and the automation and some of the other things that were going on in each of the different areas of the procurement organization, procurement and sourcing organization. What was your impression when you saw the lack of activity, and what do you think is driving those obstacles?
Well, and I'm curious to see what other obstacles people say, because obviously funding is an easy excuse. You know, we're not funded to be innovative, and that to me is a crock, to be honest with you. You don't need a lot of revenue to be given to you or funds to expand for you to be able to be innovative. And I do think, you know, putting that block up and saying that's the reason we're not is not appropriate. I think the ones who are really going to be leaders are the ones who are going to seek out the opportunities. Very similar to what you said about the one CPO you spoke with who works with early stage companies to adopt new technologies. You know, yes, there's a risk to that. On the other hand, he's out ahead of a lot of other people on driving innovation at literally, you know, low to no cost of its own, because a lot of these innovative companies that are out there that want to drive change for you will do it at a really low cost if you're one of the early people that adopt their technology. So I guess I'm curious to see what other people said, you know, were there obstacles and why they didn't try and overcome them. And then I think what we need to do is just find a way to educate people on how to overcome these perceptions of obstacles. So.
Yeah, I always take the funding one to be interesting, because I almost wonder if that's more of a, you know, no guts to ask the question for money, because I know of
exactly.
very few organizations, if you have a good business case, you can't find the funds. And I almost wonder if it's just that lack of conviction in hey, I can really drive business value, and I have the right to ask for those funds.
And I think in the era right now of risk mitigation, you know, anything we can do to mitigate risk in our third parties would give you the right to ask for the funds, because that's scary for everyone all the way up to your board of directors if you don't mitigate risk. So yeah, I just find that as sort of an excuse. I agree.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect of not asking for the money is I don't know that it's actually about how much money you ask for. Again, it goes back to that cultural aspect of it. Hey, even if I'm putting aside a relatively small number, it's still the mentality that we're going to ask or the intent to make the change, and that just drives so much of an attitude toward the organization. So you know, even if it's not a big gigantic, you know, bundle of money, it's still the attitude that I think is extremely important as well.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, I was at an event yesterday and I was speaking to some CPOs, and I'll be absolutely honest with you. I think the ones who are innovative are the ones who are curious, and they show that curiosity to the rest of their team and say, you know, we want to know what else is out there, and we're always looking and not just happy with what we have. You know, our stack of technology is all that we need. You know, we've hit our own pinnacle, and the truth is you never will, because technology is always changing. And I think the ones who have a natural curiosity and then teach that to their staff to be curious about what else is going on are the ones who are going to naturally innovate themselves.
So Dawn, you're talking to clients all the time, same as we are. What projects do you find that are most interesting here? You talked a little bit about risk, but what specific projects? You've seen some of the new technologies that are out there. Which ones kind of get you excited? Which ones do you think that are almost, you have to really get serious about?
Well, it's funny, I was shocked at how many companies have not adopted anything around contract management and contract lifecycle, and still using repositories like SharePoint or file drawers or binders. And that, to me, the people who have adopted a strong contract management lifecycle technology are the ones who can scan all of their contracts, look for clauses that denote risk, look for things that they can do massive scans of all of their agreements. And so while it sounds like a very non-sexy type thing to adopt, it gives you such visibility into all of your third parties so that you can ask the question of who are your fourth parties and who are the fifth parties. And, and Michael, you said something about the benign tail. And to me, the tail is one of your biggest risk aspects, that you don't know what you don't know. And most of us don't know what's in the tail and who those players are. And we've done little to no due diligence. And we have no idea if they subcontract out. We have no idea about their cybersecurity protections. And so to me, the tail is going to come back and bite a lot of companies. And I think some of the new technologies that are out there, people that are starting to attack it through the use of AI and technology, are the ones that are finding that they can eliminate a lot of risk in their tail that they didn't even know was there. And while it's not fun spend because you don't get to strategically source it and they're small dollar amounts, it's fraught with issues for a lot of these companies. So I think, what I'm finding is that the people that are paying attention to the tail realize there's a lot of risk, realize that there's technology out there that they can adopt to crawl through the tail. So that's pretty exciting. And the people that are adopting contract management lifecycle, as much as that is so unsexy, it is so necessary today. And those people are finding all kinds of things that they need to change in their organization. And they're so thankful for these technologies that didn't exist a few years ago.
Yeah, and Dawn, we go to the tailspin and also the risk management kind of got to go hand in hand in my mind, and that was really the kind of the litmus test in the conversations. So those that were actually addressing it generally using technology. So they weren't addressing the tailspin or the risk management through more bodies. It was more of a conversation. This is where we could apply the technology, because there's no way we can get the funding no way we could justify the funding for lots more bodies, but this is where technology really came to play. And so as we were going through the interviews, I was like, I could ask that one, almost feel like I could ask that one question first and almost tell you exactly how they're going to do with the rest of the conversation. And it's not
I bet.
Yeah, it's not the most important question, but it is kind of a good litmus test. It says, hey, you just ignore the risk, or you let somebody else worry about the risk, you let somebody else worry about the tailspin, or don't spend any time on it. You probably aren't doing the rest of the things in the more important areas as well. So that was kind of a litmus test as I was looking at it. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Dawn, and this wasn't part of our preset questions, I wanted to, so I'm going to take us a little off script here. The whole conversation around, the one platform versus best of breed. As we were talking through some of the interviews, it became a little bit obvious that there was two trains of thought. One is I needed to have the big procurement platform with all the bells and whistles trying to come from that platform, versus another set of another perspective, which was best of breed. Any thoughts on that in terms of, in all the discussions you've been having of how that plays into it? So is it better to go with a whole bunch of small packages, to drive the single best opportunities, or is it better to go with the big bang? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely believe in the suites. I think that they, because of the tight integration, I think that the suites are a great option, but I will never, ever vouch that anyone has the strongest module in every single part of their suite. They might be really good at spend analytics, or they might be really good at sourcing, or they might be good at risk, but nobody has best in class in every single aspect of their suite. And so I believe the suites are good for a tight integration, but I do believe that you have to then go out and find the best in breed, because the suites are lacking. Otherwise, these new startups wouldn't be out there, but they're finding gaps in these suites that exist that need to be supplemented. And who knows, these newer companies might get acquired by some of the big suite players, as we've seen before. But in the meantime, there's a lot of technology out there that can really upgrade what you're doing in some of these modules. So I guess I believe in both. I think the suites are great for the tight integration, but once you have the suite in place, then you have to start beefing up some of the modules, in my opinion.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think, and we've seen this in other segments as well, beyond procurement and sourcing, would be that the big platforms bring a lot of benefit, but they also don't innovate as fast. And so in some of the conversations I've had with some of the more innovative smaller players, if you will, that are coming in with rifle shots that are very interesting, I think you can't ignore those. Right. You shouldn't ignore them, and they're surprisingly cheap. So you can get a pretty big bang for your dollar on some of those. It's now it might drive you nuts when you end up with a bunch of them in terms of trying to make sure they're all integrated. So I think you could go crazy at that, going the other extreme as well too. But I think it is that over time the big platforms will acquire the capabilities. But in the meantime, you got to think about both. I think I agree with you.
Yeah.
Shirley, let me ask you a question. So we've been talking a little bit about the technology platforms and the philosophies around that. Let's go back to the capabilities. And I mentioned a little bit about the funding, the talent recognition, the cultural leadership expectations as being key. Any thoughts on operationalizing those capabilities? So what's it take to make some of that stuff happen in real life?
So we talked a bit about the funding issue. So clearly having dedicated funding makes things easier, and usually this occurs in organizations that value innovation more broadly beyond just procurement, right? But we talked about some of the ways to drive innovation even without that dedicated funding. But there's other differentiating capabilities that play a huge part in driving those great outcomes from sourcing innovation. Your people need to know that their innovative ideas will be valued, that there is a framework to assess its worthiness, and that there is an avenue for these ideas to be implemented. And if you have a reward system that's in place that reinforces those concepts, then our data says that hard rewards, such as money and career progression, actually work better than the softer ones, like learning and development opportunities, for example.
Okay. Dawn, I see a question here for us to address here from the audience here, and I'm going to point it to you here. It says, do you think the historical view of procurement being transactional and having rigid limits to their ability to consider innovative approaches, how does that, how do we help clients identify those innovation opportunities in their processes, and how do we help them teach them about putting the business cases and messaging around that in addition to the compliance?
So there's no doubt that historically procurement was transactional. We used to buy what we were told to buy from the supplier we were told to buy from, and and then we thought we were really cool in the 80s with 3 bids and a buy. And the fact that we still talk about cost savings all the time still makes us sound very transactional. But I would say I guess I would disagree with the comment that most technologies today are focused on transactional. I think what we're trying to do is automate the transactional so we have more time to commit to the strategic aspect of what we can drive. So, no millennial or no really innovative or smart person wants to do dumb work. And so we don't want to do the transactional work. It's boring, it's repetitive. It really should be automated as much as we can. And yes, if we can drive insights from it, then we should drive insights from it. But we should be driving insights by looking at it after the fact, not by doing transactional work. So I think the technologies today are starting, the ones that include some AI, risk management and things like that, are becoming much more intuitive based, and they're raising questions and things that we should be considering that we may not have had the insight to be able to see before. So I think most of the newer technologies, excuse me, are definitely more innovative and less transactional based. And so I see it as maybe we've hit that, we've hit that point where we're coming down the other side, where we automated, we've got the transactional work, we understand it, we've either have automated or outsourced it, and now we're really focused on the strategic aspects of what we can drive value. So I think we've turned that corner, and I think we're becoming much more strategic and less transactional. I think the businesses are starting to realize it too, that we can drive such incredible insights, and one of my favorite views is to compare us, and if you don't mind a basketball analogy, I think, most CPOs, majority of them, report up through finance, the CFO. To me, and as a recovering CPA, we see things, as a CPA, you see things at the beginning when you set budgets and at the end when the game is done. So I take the analogy as procurement is really that coach that's on the floor of a basketball game, and they're looking at the plays, and they're taking players out, and they're putting players in, and they're calling plays, and they can impact the outcomes. And I see finance is looking at the scoreboard saying, yay, we're doing well, or boo, we're not winning. And I see us as the people that can actually change the play, change the impact as it's happening live. And I think we can add such strategic value to the company when people realize where we're seeing everything take place, and starting to communicate that and sell our strategic impact, to the organization, and let them know what we're seeing and why we're seeing it and how we can change it if they allow us to do that. So,
what's that?
You do agree? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I was just asking about this, the question here. The CPOs reporting to the CFO versus CPOs reporting directly to the CEO. Do you think that has an impact?
I think, unfortunately, it does. I wish they all reported to the CEO. Our latest study, I want to say 64% report, 64% report into the CFO on our last study of quite a few hundred CPOs. So reporting into finance, I think, definitely puts us in a transactional, always looking at just the scoreboard rather than all the strategic impact that we can have.
Yeah. Well, and I think, going back to the conversation around the, where do you start with the values? So the, we were looking at the chart that had the analytics and our basic analytics and advanced analytics, and really the lack of action there. When I was talking to one of the CPOs, it was really a conversation around, starting with getting the spend cube right, and having the ability to kind of have visibility to everything that was going on. If they didn't start there, then they'd be hampered. Yeah,
and ironically, we do have a lot of companies that still do not have their spend cube figured out.
Okay, let me ask a question here around, as we start to think about 2020, and if we start to think about what CPOs, what would your advice to a CPO be in terms of approaching 2020? Should they be thinking about specific projects, budgets, attitude? What would your advice be for somebody that's, hey, this gets excited by looking at the data here in this study and says, I want to make change in my organization? How would you approach it?
Well, I would say 2020 is the year of automation. That if you don't deploy a lot of robotics, I think you're going to start losing people. So to me, 2020 is the year to get our act together, to get rid of as much transactional work, to automate as much as we possibly can, if we are heading into a potential recession, which a lot of the economists are saying, is 2021, 2022 potential, we've got to get our acts together. And so I think 2020 should be the year of automation, the year of deploying robots, start looking at some AI, and then just be naturally curious and keep looking at all the new technologies. That's my hope that we see in 2020.
Yeah, and I would add to that the analytics aspects of it too. The need to be able to have that Superman visibility in terms of what's going on. Because if you don't have that visibility, I think you're flying blind. And,
yep, I agree.
And if you can't answer the basic questions that get asked of you because you don't have that visibility, then that's a bad starting place for the discussions.
Yep.
So let me go. There's some additional questions we have here. Let me ask the question here. Where did you see the applications of machine learning or artificial intelligence or chatbots or guided procurement? Where do you see that happening? Where do you see the most of that happening? How do you see that happening?
Well, we do have some members who are using chatbots within the sourcing world right now, and they're loving it. And you have to be a large enough organization, to have a chatbot that can learn. If you only get hit up with questions on an ad hoc basis, it's never going to become a smart bot. But if you get enough questions quickly enough, you can train that bot, and it can answer a tremendous number of questions. So the large organizations I've seen do this are pretty excited about it, and they feel that their chatbot is becoming almost human on its ability to flex and answer questions. Early stages, they had to feed it so much information, though, that it took a lot of work. They had to pretend they were all the help desk questions coming in. I see a lot of AI being used to crawl through the tail spend, so I like that. And we're seeing AI and machine learning on going through contracts to look for clauses, to determine where there are gaps, because unfortunately, if you've sourced an agreement and and it's not due to be sourced again for a couple of years, people forget to go back in and look at these contracts and look for these clauses that could really hurt us around risk and cyber and human trafficking, all the things that we might want to build in there. So I see AI and machine learning as absolutely critical to go through these contracts to reduce risk. And I see AI and machine learning and the tail spend as absolutely critical, because there's no other way to go through it with a human being, because it's so boring.
Yeah, and I've spent a lot of time with clients on the RPA. It's another topic I dig deep into, and I think there's a lot of excitement there. And in RPA, even what RPA was 2 or 3 years ago is not what RPA looks like today. And in fact, yeah. So I think RPA is now it's growing so fast and becoming such a powerhouse in terms of it's starting to add layers of AI into the RPA, which gives it that increased capability pretty quickly. So I think those are some of the really exciting opportunities. And again, allowing the organization to either eliminate the manual need for human intervention on the transactional layer, and then moving into more about higher value conversations. Now that takes a recalibration of the staff to make that happen. So it's not going to just happen with necessarily the same people. So you may have to be thinking about how we to recalibrate the talent pool as well.
Yeah, and so not to blow our own horn, but we have an RPA certification coming out next year, and it's to teach people how to look for which processes can be automated, so how to do that assessment, and then more importantly, how do you actually then deploy RPA and make these robots actually work within your system. So we're going to be launching a certification starting in January on RPA. So that's another reason I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's I see another question here about data preparation for procurement. Huge issue. Any thoughts on that?
So describe I guess I need a little more background.
Just the questions around, I guess it's really adding on to the previous conversation in terms of data preparation. I mean, it goes back to, in my mind, having clean data is the key to success. So, I experienced this personally as a chief research officer for my previous company, is if you didn't have good master data management, the world fell apart, or the world became a much more manual world very quickly.
Well, yeah, and it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't have good data cleansing, and you don't have your arms around the data, you can feed it to a chatbot, you can feed it to AI, it's not going to get you anywhere. So, whoever's asking the question is absolutely right, and I hope they do have good data, because it is absolutely critical that your data has been cleansed, it's been organized, it's been classified, or you're not going to be able to make sense of it. And I know somebody big on AI might say, well, we can look at unstructured data. Yeah, you can. You can definitely look at unstructured data, but you can't look at garbage data. So I still think we have a lot of cleaning up to do in a lot of companies that haven't deployed a lot of technology, so that the data is clean enough to be able to apply these other avenues, other innovative ways of looking at the data. So.
Yeah, I mean, and again, being a consumer of the data in my last role, it would drive me nuts when my teams couldn't bring back good information because they couldn't understand who Coca-Cola was. And I obviously know who Coca-Cola is,
right.
But there's Coke, and there were 17 different versions of the Coke data in our systems for a variety of reasons. And it used to drive me nuts because, if they didn't get every single one and the taxonomies weren't correct, the data was very misleading. And Coke was the easy one.
Yeah, and you have the IBMs and the International Business Machines and the I period, B period, M period. It's but I mean, I hate to say it, but we've been doing that kind of data cleansing since the 90s. So what have these companies been doing that don't have that level of taxonomy correct by now? It shocks me every time I hear of one that hasn't done it yet.
Well, you probably do it the way I did it, which was manually, which was no fun.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, all right. So Shirley, I'm going to leave a final question here with you, and Dawn, I'll come back to you for one final thought. Anything else that you're listening to the discussion, Shirley?
Well, I guess there was one last question that I don't think we got to, and that was just giving some examples around the cost savings achieved by Pinnacle Enterprises. And essentially the savings come not only in reduction in spend by your businesses and functional stakeholders, but it's also the reduction in cost of your procurement processes, right? So just to kind of give an example of one of the organizations that we've talked to, they were able to reduce spend by more than 10%. And they did this through leveraging insights from existing data. They benchmarked processes, and they improved their negotiation skills, actually. So while they're doing that and delivering that business outcome for their stakeholders, they were actually also able to reduce their own cost of operations within procurement by 45%. And they did that through harmonizing their procurement processes and also offshoring as well. So there's a lot of really great cases such as that we've come across through the course of the study. And in fact, actually, this webinar kind of just gives a few of the really interesting data points, but we have a whole bunch more insight that sits behind this summary. So if people are interested in getting more information about that, they should definitely reach out to us.
Okay, Dawn, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just really proud of the fact that a couple of our members are up in the upper right-hand quadrant and are Pinnacle success stories. So hopefully see more of those. But no, I've really enjoyed the study, and I really hope people get inspired to be more innovative and more curious about what's out there. And so I think the more we can give them as far as, proof from companies that are doing it and show them the successes, I think it'll inspire a lot more to want to follow.
Yeah, I think that curiosity, the building of the culture, I think is absolutely key, because I don't think this is not something you have to have a gigantic, I need hundreds of millions of dollars to do this, and it's beyond anybody's reach. I think there are lots of things that are there that just for the taking, if you will. All right. Well, so Dawn, I want to thank you for your participation, both in the creation of the study as a whole process, and also today. So I appreciate that, and I know we'll be featuring this the study and a broader discussion with some of your members at your upcoming SIG session in October, so they can look to that if they're interested. Yeah. And then we're also going to have a virtual roundtable here in November, where we're going to take the same exact discussion, but instead of having Shirley and myself lead and Dawn discuss it, we're going to bring in a real life CPO and encourage audience discussion. So we'll do a virtual roundtable looking at it from a practitioner's perspective. And so we'll have the data perspective and the commentary that went with that. Then we'll also get the practitioner's perspective. So highly encourage that if you're interested in furthering this discussion, join SIG in their upcoming event, or join us on the virtual roundtable, or perhaps do both. I think that'd be good. There'll be two different audiences there, so it's a good opportunity. And with that, anything else, Peter? Just the methodology, we'll leave that in the appendix. And of course, we have lots of other good content. I would never want to say that we lack for content. We have tons. And so if you're interested in further discussions on this, feel free to reach out to us. Okay, I thank you for your time.
Thank you again, Michael.
All right, thank you, Dawn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Michael, Shirley, and Dawn, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Again, you'll receive a follow-up email within 1 to 2 business days with a link to download the presentation slides, along with accessing the on-demand playback for today's live session. In addition, please be sure to check out Everest Group's complimentary resources to access their current perspectives on sourcing innovation and other global sourcing topics. On behalf of the Everest Group and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.